Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center's Curator's Corner. My name is Thorin Tritter. I'm the Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, which is located in Glen Cove, New York. Before we start, I wanted to mention a couple of things. First of all, just to emphasize, our building is open. So if you are inspired through this program or some of the other programs that you may have seen to come and see these objects in person, we are open and we encourage you to come by and take a look. If you're interested in arranging a tour, we can also do that. Just contact us in advance and we can try and line up a docent to lead you through our museum. Two other things I wanted to mention. One is what I always say before we leap into these programs, which is if you have a question that comes up, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom to type in your question. I'll make sure to make time to look through those at the end of my presentation. And the last thing I wanted to touch on before we start is I wanted to ask for your financial support. We are launching a Buy a Brick campaign where you can help HMTC and honor a family member or someone special through the placement of a personalized brick in the newly restored patio that overlooks the Children's Memorial Garden here at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center. I think we're going to be sending out an email about this in the next week or so, but I thought I would mention it at the beginning of my program just to let you know as well. We really could use your help. And one other thing I'll mention, if anybody's interested in becoming a sponsor for one of HMT's upcoming public program series or some of the Curator's Corners program, we would be delighted to have that financial support. And you can contact the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center's Director of Development, Gail Peck, at the number I've listed there. But we really could use your financial support to enable us to continue offering our public programs. Okay, I won't push further at this point, but I hope that some of you will be interested in sponsoring our programs. Let's get on to today's talk. I wanted to talk today about this attractive silver-plated creamer that we have in our collection. It was given to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center by Bernice and Mel Kraulstein. While Mel passed away a few years ago, I am very grateful to Bernice for all her help helping me to prepare for this presentation. One of the notable features of this creamer, and the reason it's parts of our collection, is because of the subtle swastika that is imprinted on its base. But before I talk about that swastika, let me mention a few of the other markings that are on this creamer. For example, you may be able to see that in addition to the swastika, there is something else marked on the bottom of the creamer. Hopefully this zoomed in version of the photo gives you a better look. It is embossed with 0.20, which is actually a reference to the size. The creamer holds 2/10 or 0.2 of a liter. So a bit less than a cup of liquid. Oopsie. Sorry, I didn't realize my phone was around there. So it holds a little less than a cup of liquid, so enough for a couple of cups of coffee. But we're talking, and this is the reason I mentioned it right at the beginning, we're talking about a pretty small item. This is a creamer that could sit in the palm of your hand, really. The other notable marking on this piece is on the side, which you probably saw in the first image, which is where it says Der Deutsche Hof, which means the German court, and that is imprinted also on the creamer. Der Deutsche Hof was the name of a hotel that opened in Nuremberg in 1913. Here you get a view of that building. It was located actually just outside the city wall of Nuremberg. Here you see a map of the city, and I'll zoom in there. There's the wall that was a medieval wall that encircled the city. And right outside of that wall was Der Deutsche Hof. The hotel stood in a pretty good location because it was across the street from the main opera house and just a couple of blocks away from the main train station in Nuremberg. And as became important, it faced a large boulevard that ran parallel to the old wall. So this wide space, wide road right outside the doors to this hotel. The hotel was actually only part of the building, which was built by the Association of Nuremberg's Teachers to house a club for their members. The hotel was incorporated as a way to help pay the association's operations. So much of the building actually housed the club, and it included a theater and a ballroom, but a portion of the building was dedicated as this revenue-generating hotel. And the hotel from the beginning was designed as an upscale hotel. And like many upscale hotels, it had its name embossed on silverware and on the coffee and tea service. Of course, in the years before 1933, these items did not include a swastika, just the name of the hotel. Like on this fish knife that was produced by the well-known silversmith firm of Wellner and Sons between 1914 and 1921, that you can see just included the hotel name. There's no silver mark on our creamer, so we can't know who made it. But I will add that Wellner and Sons, who made some of the silver service for the hotel, also supplied tableware for other luxury hotels in Europe and for some of the great passenger liners of the era, including the Titanic. So Der Deutsche Hof was running an elite class of hotels to have this kind of quality silver embossed by this major firm in its operations. Beginning in the early 1920s, Der Deutsche Hof became the preferred hotel in Nuremberg for Adolf Hitler and other leading members of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis. The Nazi Party, as you may recall, was established in 1919 as the German Workers' Party and then added National Socialist to its name the following year in 1920. 1 year later, after that, in 1921, Adolf Hitler was named as the leader of this young party, which was still very much a fringe party. In 1923, the Nazis launched their first annual party rally, which is held in 1923 in Munich, then in the following year in Weimar, and then beginning in 1927 and for subsequent years in Nuremberg. Nuremberg was seen as a particularly appropriate city to host these Nazi Party rallies, partially because the Nazis had strong support in Bavaria, the state that includes Nuremberg. Nuremberg was also relatively centrally located in Germany. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, because Nuremberg had been the location of the imperial court of the Holy Roman Emperor, which the Nazis referred to as the the First Reich. They saw themselves as establishing a new German empire, the Third Reich, and wanted to draw connections to that First Reich, to the First Holy Roman Empire. So beginning in 1927 and extending until 1938, so for 11 years, the Nazi Party organized massive rallies in Nuremberg. Perhaps a photograph like this gives you a sense of the scale of these rallies. You may well have seen other pictures. This is one that we have in our exhibit, in our museum. I'll zoom in and you can just see the scale of these things. I mean, the row after row of people lined up in the middle of this massive marching, a parade field, but also crowds in the stands as well. And as I hope this photo conveys, the Nazi Party rallies were massive events that drew thousands of Germans to Nuremberg. One last comment about the Nazi Party rallies. In 1934, the filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl came to the Nazi Party rally in Nuremberg and used footage for her film Triumph of the Will, which was largely a propaganda piece about Hitler and the Nazi Party. Here you actually see Leni Riefenstahl filming in front of Hitler's car. And if you watch the film Triumph of the Will, you can see Der Deutsche Hof as a prominent backdrop for some of the early scenes. And here you see one of those scenes. Hitler particularly liked to stay in this room where he's shown in the film because it looked out over the wide boulevard in front of the hotel and enabled him to watch the Nazi Party parades that went past. And Der Deutsche Hof was the only hotel in Nuremberg that he stayed in. Its location made it perfect for him. By 1935, the hotel was promoting itself as Hitler's hotel. This is a postcard from around 1935, and it says the name of the hotel and then adds the phrase, the Führer apartment, highlighting that this was where Hitler stayed. It's not clear whether Der Deutsche Hof added the swastika to its tableware like our creamer. Sorry, it's not clear when Der Deutsche Hof added the swastika to its tableware and to the creamer. And I should make clear that it was not just on their creamers, but on all their flatware that you can see here, as well as on serving platters, and coffee and tea urns. It's possible that the swastika was added early in 1935, although it may not have been until the following year, 1936. And the date actually does matter, because in 1935, the Teachers Association that owned the hotel sold the building to the Nazi Party. Whether under duress or voluntarily, we don't know. The Nazi Party also purchased the adjoining building and merged the two together, significantly expanding the hotel to accommodate diplomats and more of the Nazi leadership when they were in Nuremberg. Here's a photograph of the merged building unified with Nazi decorations. One other part of the new design was a platform specifically built for Hitler to stand on to watch the parades as they went by. And that was referred to as the Führer balcony. So instead of having a particular room, which was on a low floor that he could look out on, now there was a particularly designed balcony for him to stand on. So if the, this picture, I think, gives you a better view of that balcony, or this one where you see Hitler standing on that balcony looking over these parades. So if the addition of the swastika to the hotel's creamer and tableware came after the Nazi Party purchased the building, it may be because by then the hotel was actually owned by the Nazi Party, so they were putting their symbol on it. If the addition came before the purchase, when it was still owned by the Teachers Association, it was due to a decision by a private organization to embrace National Socialism. In reality, that wouldn't have been so strange, at least for a decision in Germany in 1935. Hitler had come to power in 1933 when the Nazi Party won the largest representation of any party in Germany in the Reichstag, in the German parliament. And in the following years, Hitler's popularity and public support for the Nazi Party grew. Despite what we would like to believe, Germans, German businesses, and German organizations rallied around Hitler, apparently unbothered by his anti-Semitic policies, or perhaps even in favor of them. The Nazi Party actually encouraged this with what they called Gleichschaltung, the synchronization, where all private and corporate interests were supposed to synchronize with the Nazi Party's interests, which were equated with the nation's interests and the interests of the Volk, the German people. So the addition of the swastika to our creamer was an outward sign of the hotel's support for the Nazi Party, for the nation, and the German people, all of which were thought to be one and the same. There were Germans, of course, who opposed Hitler, and there were corporations and organizations that didn't want to synchronize with the Nazi Party. And I'm not just talking about Jews or Jewish businesses who quickly lost any power or rights in Germany. I'm talking about non-Jewish businesses and non-Jewish German owners. But the Nazis made it clear that the consequences for not joining the Nazi Party or not supporting the Nazi Party were pretty dramatic, and that the Germans should go along with the tide. One example of how the Germans made this clear, or the Nazis made this clear, was through Hitler's support for a cheap automobile. Somewhat tangential topic, but in 1934, after only a year in power, Hitler reached out to German car manufacturers and urged them to come out with a small, cheap, fuel-efficient German car that could be purchased by German families to travel on the planned-for autobahns. But German car companies that largely catered to a wealthy population didn't see selling a cheap car as something that was appealing. So they stuck to making the more expensive cars that only were used by about 2% of the German population. Unsatisfied by their lack of a response, Hitler used his governmental powers to create a state-owned automobile company, which initially had a rather long name, but was quickly shortened to Volkswagen, the People's Car Company. The operation was not initially profitable, but funding from the Nazi state made profitability irrelevant. And Hitler's actions with the Volkswagen did not go unnoticed by private car manufacturers and other business leaders, who quickly realized that the risk they faced if a state-owned company was created to directly compete against them would be significant. So even a small hotel like Der Deutsche Hof knew that if it did not join with the Nazis, it was likely going to be pushed aside by them. In the end, even though it appears that the hotel did embrace the Nazis, it was still pushed aside and taken over by the Nazi Party. So to get back to the building, once the war formally started in 1939, it continued to host Nazi dignitaries, but the Nazi Party stopped holding the annual rallies, and so there was not the same demand as before 1939. The war also interrupted Hitler's larger plans for Nuremberg, which he had unveiled at the Paris World's Fair in 1937. In 1937, his plans included construction of a massive Congress hall with indoor seating for 50,000 and an even larger Colosseum, which would have held 400,000 people, the largest Colosseum in the world it was planned for. As I said, the war delayed these projects, and eventually the collapse of the Nazi regime meant they were never completed. Although you can, if you visit Nuremberg today, go to the Congress Hall or the remnant of it, and it houses an impressive museum and Nazi documentation center. After the war's end, Der Deutsche Hof, the hotel, was in rough shape, having suffered severe bomb damage in January of 1945. Over the following 4 years, it was slowly repaired and rebuilt, and initially served as a new home for a private theater and events hall, not as a hotel. In 1949, it was returned to the Association of Nuremberg Teachers, who reopened the hotel in August of 1949, and which continued to operate it under a couple of different owners until 2004. After laying unused from 2004 to 2014, the building was converted to residential apartments in 2014. The silverware and table services from Der Deutsche Hof Hotel were sold off at different times over the years. Our creamer came to our collection by way of a restaurant in Munich and through an American GI and his wife. In 1952, Bernice and Mel Kraustein were newlyweds. But 3 weeks after their wedding, Mel was drafted into the Korean War, and he was told he was going to be serving on a military base near Munich. Bernice, his newlywed wife, faced the prospect of not seeing her husband for up to 2 years. She decided to throw caution to the wind, and she moved to Germany to be at least near where her husband was stationed. She couldn't live on the military base, but she found an apartment nearby and settled into a temporary life in a new country. While her family were shocked at her decision, moving to Germany enabled her to see her husband on a regular basis and enabled them to travel around Europe. The photo that I've got up here shows Mel and Bernice in February of 1952 during their time together in Germany. A few months after she arrived, Bernice and Mel were dining in a restaurant in Munich and were served coffee with the creamer from Der Deutsche Hof. When she lifted the creamer up, Bernice spotted the swastika. Now, again, this is 7 years after the end of World War II, but the remnants of the Third Reich were still all around. On the one hand, she was shocked to see the swastika and wanted to do something to remove it from general circulation, but she also recognized that the effort to clean Germany of its connections to the Nazi past meant that items like this creamer might become increasingly rare, and so another incentive for her to think about acquiring it. And that's exactly what she did. She acquired the creamer from the restaurant and brought it back to America when Mel ended his military service, eventually burying it in a drawer in their home that they settled into in Plainview here on Long Island. Years later, she came across it and realized that our museum was a much better place to hold this creamer than her drawer. And we are honored to have it in our collection to preserve the way the Nazi Party infused everyday objects in Germany with its symbol. I'm going to stop there. I hope that that has answered some questions to you about this little creamer. If you've got questions, please type them in and I'll get to them. One more thing before I get to those, though, to remind you of some of our upcoming programs. Tomorrow, our new Director of Education, Dr. Avi Markovitz, is giving a talk entitled Exploring Jewish Leadership During the Shoah. Drawing on his own research and his experience at Yad Vashem, Dr. Markovitz is going to speak about how various types of religious leaders responded to life in Nazi ghettos. I will be back for my next Curator's Corner on next Wednesday, October 20th at 11 o'clock, back at our normal time, when I'm going to be talking about two posters that we display in our gallery that Hitler used during his failed 1932 presidential campaign, which he lost to Paul von Hindenburg. I'm going to talk more about that campaign, about politics in Germany in the 1930s, and about Hitler's political message. And one more program on Thursday, October 21st. I will be leading a virtual tour through our museum with my colleague Avi Markovitz. We're going to be walking through the galleries and talking about the galleries in a virtual tour for those who are not able to come in person. You can find a full listing of our upcoming programs on our website at www.hmtcli.org under the events tab. Okay, oh, and I hope that you will reach out if you'd be willing to sponsor some of our online programming. Okay, let me take a look and see your questions. Pop that down. Do you know if people were usually aware of which places and businesses were supporting the Nazis and which ones were not? Do you know how boldly places and businesses tended to make their support for or disagreement with the Nazis known? Thanks very much for that question. I think obviously this changes over time, but if you are talking about after 1935, I think it would have been very hard to show your disappreciation for the Nazis or your disappointment with the Nazis. Mostly every store and business and individual was forced to show their support. There are a number of legal cases that went to trial of various government officials who didn't raise their hand in a salute or didn't show the flag of the Nazi party at various times, and for that they actually got fired. Now those were government employees, but even private individuals could be arrested or detained for not showing support because it was seen as somehow undermining the nation, according to the Nazis. And for Jews, who would be the first to perhaps demonstrate their lack of support for the Nazis and for Adolf Hitler, they were removed from any ability to have any power or exert any power, and suffered physical arrest and violence when they showed their disrespect for Hitler and the Nazi party. So generally speaking, I think it's hard to know whether a company or an individual was showing support for the Nazi party because of a deep felt support or because of a feeling like if they didn't, they would suffer the consequences. It's hard to know which was the reason. And I think that exact thing became evident after the war when people claimed they had only been going along because they were afraid. And it makes it hard to know how many were doing it because they really believed in it. So I hope that helps answer your question. Thanks again for tuning into our program today. And I look forward to seeing you at some of our other programs soon. Be well, everybody. Thanks a lot.